A new view for a new day. So this is going to be kind of my setup for the next several videos. It will change slightly as I go through them, but this is kind of what we're looking at. So this is the first video of my 2017 wrap-up. And for this one, we're going to be talking about the goals that I made for reading in 2017. And I'll link the video down that below. I've made 2 different types of goals and 3 goals in total. My first goal was to read 52 books. And as you can see, I have done that. I have managed to read 100 books and I am so proud of myself. All of them will not even fit on the shelf. So that's really, really something. And then I had 2 different types of goals for the books that I wanted to read. One was 12 books that I wanted to read by the end of 2017, and I'm proud to say that I have also achieved that, and we're going to go through that soon. And I also had some lofty goals of books that I thought I would like to read, and I did some of those, and I didn't do others. So, let's just get right into it. So for January, I decided that I wanted to read George Orwell's 1984. And I rated it 2 stars. Apparently did not like this book. I didn't like the writing style. I thought some weird things happened. It's a lot of people's favorite book, which I don't get, but you know, I'm glad to have read it. My next goal book was Anna Karenina, which I had tried to read before and had failed miserably at reading, and I ended up rating this 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. It was a beast, and I read this in February, which I think is the perfect month to read it. I do think it's another one of those books that I want to read again in like 10 years, because I think I'll get a lot out of it if I read it a second time, and also different things out of it when I read it when I'm older. The next book that I read was Catch-22, and I thought that this one was a lot of fun. It was quirky, it was weird, it takes place in World War II, and I rated it a 4 out of 5. It's definitely a book that's going to stick with me for a while, and it's actually a duology, which I didn't realize when I started reading it. My next goal book was Foundation by Isaac Asimov. This is, of course, a classic science fiction novel, and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't what I expected, but not necessarily not what I expected in a bad way. That, of course, was April. In May, I read Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. This was my 4th Vonnegut book that I have read, and I rated it a 3 out of 5. I think that I should do more research into him before I pick up the next book. There's one character that's in several of his books, and I had read one book that he was in, and he appeared in this one, but I didn't feel like I knew him well enough to actually fully get what happened in this book. It was weird, it was quirky, it was everything that you kind of expect from Vonnegut, and it has illustrations in it too. I think it's going to be a book that ages well because it explains a lot of things that have happened in the last 20 years that you might not get if you didn't live through them, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. The next book that I read was actually the one for July. I skipped June's book because I didn't have it yet, so I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro at the beginning of July, and I do believe that I also enjoyed this one. If you're familiar with the movie, the book and the movie are very similar, but also quite different, and I ended up rating this one a 5 out of 5. Loved it, and I probably will end up reading it again. I also really like this edition. I think it's really cool. Then, in August, I read my June book, which was The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. It, again, is a chunky book, and I rated it a 5 out of 5. My dad lent this to me, and I absolutely loved it. I can't wait to continue on the series, which if you've been watching my channel for a while, I have said every month since I have read this. For August, my goal book was called The Midwife, and I ended up reading this at the end of August, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was really good. If you're familiar with the television series, again, it is quite similar to the television series, but also different in some really interesting ways. Since I've been working in the NICU, I think that this book has meant more to me, but I did really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the memoirs in this series, which is kind of another cool thing about this. Instead of putting it in one large book, it's actually 3 or 4 books. For September, my goal book was Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This was a book that I read I bought because I really love Muppet Treasure Island. It's one of my favorite movies. I watch it frequently, and this I found a little disappointing, but not because of the Muppets. It was actually a really good book-to-movie translation, so if that's your thing, this is a good one to check out. But I just found that it kind of dragged, and then it switched perspectives, and I didn't really like that. And I really had thought that more of it would take place on the ship, and I was kind of looking for more of it to take place on the ship because I love books about seafaring and things like that. I only rated this a 3 out of 5. My goal book for October was The Island of Dr. Moreau. I don't know why I chose this because I have other books that would have been a little bit more creepy, but I did choose this one, and again, I found that it kind of let me down. This is the third book that I have read by H.G. Wells. I have read The Time Machine, which is one of my all-time favorite books, and I've also read The War of the Worlds, which was good, but not as good as The Time Machine. So I kind of had high expectations for this book. I thought it was going to be really cool. It's about vivisection and trying to create humans out of animals, which is ethically questionable, but something cool to read about. And, like, it was just okay. I rated it 3 stars. It's only like 100 pages, though this Broadview edition is much longer, but it is what it is. For November, which is not the book that I read in November. I actually read it this month in December. My goal book was American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This is another one that I have been looking forward to for some time. I really love Stardust, but this one didn't quite do it for me. I only rated it 3 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not my favorite book that I have read ever, and it was kind of weird. I did read the author's preferred text, which is supposed to be better, but here we are. And finally, for December, my goal book was To Kill a Mockingbird. This is a book that I had never read and felt like it was one that's in the canon that should be read. And I'm glad I did. I absolutely adored this book. I rated it 5 out of 5. It's definitely one that I'm going to reread again. I don't know how soon, but it was just fantastic. And I loved it. Finally, on to my lofty goals. So my lofty goals were quite extensive. I had several books, almost 10 there, and I read probably 3 or 4 of them. So the first one that I read that was on my lofty goals, I actually read at the beginning of the year in February, which was The Queen of the Tearling. This was a 5-star book for me, and I absolutely loved it. It's the first of a trilogy, which I've also completed this year, which is exciting. But yeah, this one was really good, so it was a really good choice. I buddy read it with my best friend Jacqueline, and I'm really, really glad that I did. The next book I read for my lofty goals was The Explorers Guild by John Baird and Kevin Costner, and this is a graphic novel that has novel bits in it. And I thought that that was really cool. It's the first kind of graphic novel that I've read since I read the first Artemis Fowl graphic novel when I was a child. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool. This is supposed to be a series, so there's no release date for the second book. And I think I rated this 5 out of 5 as well. If not, it was 4 out of 5. After that, for my lofty goals, I read Dance of Dragons by George R.R. Martin. I really wanted to read this year so that I'd be caught up in the series for when the next book finally comes out. Though I won't buy it right away because I do want it in the trade paperback. It's one of my preferred methods of reading high fantasy novels, and this one was like just okay. It was definitely not my favorite book that I've read in 2017, and it's definitely not the best high fantasy novel. It's, again, if you watch my review for this, I don't even really consider this high fantasy. I consider this like historical fantasy, or it's even more like a historical fiction book. But I rated it 3 out of 5. I don't really think Game of Thrones is for me, but, you know. And finally, for my lofty goals, I read All Quiet on the Western Front by Heinrich Maria Remarque. This is a novel about World War I set from a German perspective, and I absolutely love this book. I thought it was so fantastic, I couldn't put it down, and I rated it 5 out of 5. So I'm really glad that I did end up reading this one. The ones that I didn't end up reading were Trespassers on the Roof of the World by Peter Hopkin, Sophie's World, Cosmos by Carl Sagan, Ulysses, the books, 13 books of the Elements by Euclid, and yeah, so like I didn't do too bad. I read half of the lofty goals. I don't think I'm going to do that this year. I think I'm going to change up how my lofty goals is going to work, and so it's not so set, that I have some wiggle room so that I can choose more of things that I want to read at that time. Because later on it turned out that I didn't really want to read Euclid and I didn't really want to read these books. But yeah, those were all the things that I read for my 2017 goals. I think I did really good. I really enjoyed the way that this all worked out, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I can't wait to show you what my 2018 goals are. I think they're going to be really good too. But until then, we'll see you in the next video.